Welcome to Lessons in Rural Community Engagement, a conversation series with Chelsey Patriss and Rosa Fernandez of the Health Equity Partnership of North Central Massachusetts.
So this one is navigating relationships between grassroots groups and large organizations.
Oh, okay.
So we obviously have some very specific experience with this, but we're going to try and talk in like generalities about it. And I think when you are an organization that sits in that middle place, right, where you have relationships with these institutions, these larger organizations, and you have relationships with community-based grassroots groups that are, the change makers, the people who are protesting something, and the people who are disruptors, and who, are going to be loud and are going to be passionate and are going to talk about their pain and their personal experiences. You are going to come in conflict, right? You're going to end up right in the middle of people coming from both sides. And we have been pretty beat up in the process of being in that sandwich. But I think an organization that bridges that it's really important to have an organization that can sit in that space. Because organizations, we're almost like mediators, right? Like the large institutions may not want to hear from those outside groups. And likewise, those grassroots groups may not be hearing from the institutions. At least they may not trust or believe what they're hearing from the institutions.
But I think that's where the assumptions come into play because I think sometimes these institutions don't know what each other are doing. And that's why it's so important that they come together because then we don't fall into those assumptions. So, because sometimes I feel like maybe large institutions have the greatest intentions of really doing what's right for the community, and maybe for smaller institutions, they think these large institutions have no clue what's going on, or they're really not invested in it. But then they have the greatest employee engagement numbers, and they're really focused on their employee population. And we're really thinking, oh, they're not doing anything, but they really are invested in their employee. But because they're not talking to one another, and that's why engagement is also so important and imperative in this work, because then we have a better understanding what these things are doing.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then maybe if they were starting to talk to one another, they could be creative with their development and implementing other strategies within their organization. So, yeah.
I think it's important too that we, if when we find ourselves in that middle position, that we aren't owning the decisions of either group, right? We are neutral and I don't mean in a like we don't have an opinion kind of way, but that as an organization, our job is to make sure both sides are heard and understood. And that doesn't mean that they're going to agree, and it doesn't mean that we agree with either side. But to get to a place where there's a feeling that we understand each other, right? So that if an institution, a larger institution, has made a decision that is maybe unpopular with a grassroots group, that whether the grassroots group agrees with that decision or not, that we can put them in a position where they can hear what that decision is, why it's been made, and give them the opportunity to push back, and give them the opportunity to express the effect that decision is having on grassroots groups and on residents, without us in the middle owning the decision of the institution or having to kind of be the standard bearer for the grassroots group.
Right. And that's why it's so important that we set some norms when we come into these spaces, and not that we're agreeing or disagreeing with any group, but how we come how we gonna act, how we gonna respond to these strategies, or the relationships, how we gonna respond if we come to some set of agreements before we come into play. Like that we're gonna that we're gonna listen with an open mind and open heart, that everyone's gonna have an opportunity to be heard. And so it's very important that we set certain norms, because then that's when authenticity starts to form.
I think, we have to, when you're a coalition and when you're trying to bring together groups of many different sizes, many different makeups and backgrounds and, agendas and missions and all of that and values, and even methodologies, right? Even like the way they go about trying to do things or make change. Conflict is inevitable. It's going to happen, whether it's we all want the same thing, but you're not going fast enough for us, or you're going too fast for us, or you're spending more money in this community than in this community, or, there's all kinds of things. Even if we agree, we don't agree. And it's, I think, important for us as a coalition to make sure that we're maintaining positive relationships with all of the partners, where we're acknowledging the good things that they're doing, the good intentions that they have, and not letting them rest in that, right? Not just being like, you're doing such a great job, we love you, oh, don't listen to any of the criticism. So being like gentle but still, encouraging change, right? Not just saying like, you're doing a great job, don't listen to anybody else, and not being like, nothing you do is ever good enough.
Right.
Because that discourages change, right? Like that, they will stop even inviting you to the table if all you're ever going to do is tell them that nothing's ever good enough.
Right. I agree.
And I think that's a hard line to walk, and it's hard to explain to some folks, when you are trying to maintain a positive relationship with an organization that they may have very strong feelings about.
Mm-hmm. And for every organization, there's a business plan. So in that plan, or a strategic plan, or it's like increase productivity, or increase, or decrease something that's not working. So in order to really do that, you really need to navigate these relationships, so that way we could bring them all together to focus on those strategic goals that the organization is trying to achieve. That North Star. How do we all reach that North Star? And so
yeah, it's not enough to have community engagement specialists who are deep in the community if at the institutional organizational level they're not really adopting those recommendations.
And it goes in the community itself too. Like, you really have to be receptive to the input that our community members are really sharing. Not to dismiss it like that's not a great idea. You really got to come into these spaces saying every idea that is given is important.
I think when we're talking about large institutions that may have kind of a central office in a bigger city, and then we're talking about rural community engagement, the perception of that institution can be very different in their home base, right, than it is in those outskirt communities. And I think that can be very jarring for the institution, because they think that they have this wonderful reputation in the community, and the community that they have a really wonderful reputation in is just the 5 blocks surrounding their home base of where their mothership is, and they may have a very different reputation, in our rural communities that are going to say we don't get enough resources, there aren't enough people to do the work. You have, these part-time open offices and they're not even accessible to us, or you're sending people from your rural communities to and making them go all the way to your central office for services. And, I think it can be hard to hear that the community engagement is not going well. But I think that's a reality in our rural communities that some of our large institutions really need to be more aware of.
They need to be educated. And education is a huge component to this work. Is really just because you come from a larger institution, you don't know all the answers, and just come. We talked about humility throughout our segments here, and really. And we also talked about intentionality and so forth. But really, we have to own it. We have to, as either large institution, small institution, being a person in the community, we have to own our part.
Mm-hmm.
The community engagement work can seem like you're just always on this, this hamster wheel of
because you engage with a person and you build a good relationship and then they move on and then they've gone somewhere else and you realize that you don't have a relationship with the next person who's in that role, or maybe they were kind of like the linchpin, like your one connection in that organization. So it can be hard because you have to have a relationship with more than just the one person in that organization. And that can be hard even if you're trying to do it, because sometimes the organization has kind of gatekeepers, right? Where they're like, no, this is the person who goes to all of the things. And so nobody else needs to talk to you, just that one person. So it can be hard to build a relationship with an organization when you've built that through just one individual.
I think for more reason to educate organizations about allowing more of their staff and more of their employees to be more engaged, because they bring another set of diverse lens. And it's just to show how some of these organizations also work in silos, and not working with one another to kind of solve a problem, even within their organization or for the community. So it really involving as many or more within your own organization also not only shifts the narrative, but it cultivates the culture of the organization.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Lessons in Rural Community Engagement with the Health Equity Partnership of North Central Massachusetts and paid for by a grant from the Massachusetts Department of Public Health through the New England Rural Health Association.